Highbridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Why We Hate, Understanding the Roots of Human Conflict, by Michael Ruse. Read by Mike Cooper. Preface. I was raised a Quaker in the years after the Second World War. Quakers don't have the usual trimmings of religion, preachers, churches, steeplehouses as we called them of old, or creeds and dogmas and that sort of thing. However, to conclude that Quakers have no strong beliefs is to make a major mistake. They could give St. Paul a run for his money. Above all, for me, being a Quaker meant being part of a community with my fellow human beings. We were never very good at literal readings of the Bible, but my goodness, we took the Sermon on the Mount seriously. Ye have heard that it hath been said, An eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you, that ye resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also. Matthew, Book 5, verse 38 through 39. And ye have heard that it hath been said, Thou shalt love thy neighbour, and hate thine enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. Verses 43 to 44. That is our role in life and how we serve our Lord, loving other human beings. Quakers talk of the inner light, that of God in every person, and that resonates to this day. Always inspiring me, haunting me in a way, is the great elegy of the metaphysical poet John Donne that hung on the wall of nigh every meeting-house where Quakers met to worship in silence. No man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manor of thy friends or of thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. Meditation 17, from Devotions upon Emergent Occasions, 1624. Here was the paradox that has never left me, unchanged by my loss of faith when I was 20 years old. If we are such social beings, how can we be so hateful to each other? In my early years, memories of the Second World War hung over us all. Poland, the fall of France, the Blitz, Barbarossa, Pearl Harbor, Stalingrad, and on down to the end, the Battle of the Bulge and the bombing of Dresden. Across the world, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Yet this only confirmed what we already knew. The Second World War was the more recent, but it was the First World War, the Great War, that permeated every aspect of our culture. My teachers in primary school were single women who had lost fiancés and husbands on the battlefields of Flanders. Parks had lonely men wandering aimlessly, shell-shocked, as we were told in pitying terms. Go into the front parlour, the room unused except for Sundays and special occasions, like funerals. There stood a picture of Uncle Bert, 18 years old, proud in his new uniform, dead at 20 at Passchendaele. Then I went to Canada when I was 22, and soon found that it was the Great War that defined that country, as it did other parts of the Commonwealth, notably Australia and New Zealand. The triumphs, when the Canadians at Easter 1917 took Vimy Ridge, that had withstood so many earlier attempts, and the tragedies, when on July the 1st, 1916, the first day of the Battle of the Somme, some 800 members of the Newfoundland Regiment went over the top, and the next morning at roll call there were but 68 who responded. Every day, walking to and from my university, I passed the birthplace of John McCrae, author of the most quoted poem of the war, In Flanders Fields. Add to all of this the dreadful ways in which we behave to each other in our daily lives. Above all, in the years after the war, as we became increasingly aware of the horrors of the Holocaust, we saw the depths to which we humans could fall. It is but part of a general story of prejudice, and there is not one of us who can look back on history without guilt and regret. No one living in the American South, as I do, can avoid daily reminders of the appalling treatment of white people toward black people. Over 2 centuries of slavery, followed by a century of Jim Crow. Contempt, belittlement, lack of respect, toward strangers, toward people of different classes, toward members of other races, toward those with minority sexual orientations, toward adherents of different religions, toward the disabled, toward Jews, and of men toward women. Was it not naivety bring on the callous to go on talking about the social nature, the inherent goodness of human beings? It is this, our conflicted nature, so social, so hateful, that has driven me to write this book. I've found that in the past 2 decades there have been incredibly important discoveries and reinterpretations of our understanding of human evolution. Discoveries and reinterpretations highly pertinent to my quest. Finally, there seem to be some answers. I'm amazed at and grateful for what I learned. It is this new understanding that I want to share, less concerned about whether you agree or disagree with me than that you appreciate the importance of the problem and the need to continue the inquiry. It is a moral obligation laid on us all. If you doubt me, think Ukraine. Introduction. Origins. The prehistory of humans starts with the Big Bang about 13.8 billion years ago. Our solar system, about halfway through its lifespan, is about 4.5 billion years old. The planet Earth was formed from detritus circling the Sun. Life appeared about 3.8 billion years ago, in other words, about as soon as it could, after the oceans cooled enough to support its existence and continuation. For about half of the subsequent time, life was primitive, one-celled organisms, prokaryotes. Then came multi-celled organisms, eukaryotes. Although it did not come out of the blue, the big event, at least as far as we humans are concerned, was the Cambrian explosion about 550 million years ago. That was when the major life groups appeared, including chordates, a subset of which were the vertebrates, animals with backbones. Things were now racing ahead. Fish, amphibians, reptiles, including the dinosaurs, and then mammals and birds. Mammals first appeared about 225 million years ago, rat-like, nocturnal creatures, careful to keep out of the way of the dominant life group, the dinosaurs. The dinos went extinct around 65 million years ago, thanks to the planet's disruption by the impact of a meteor or similar body from space. Birds, their direct descendants, survived, and the way was open for mammals to thrive and diversify, and so came the primates about 50 million years ago. Going down in time, finally we get the great apes, and the important action, at least with respect to humans, takes place in the last 10 million years. Amazingly, we now know our human line, hominins, split from other apes, gorillas and chimpanzees, around 7 million years ago or less. Even more amazing is that we are more closely related to the chimpanzees than they are to gorillas. The break with the other great apes came with our move out from the jungle and onto the plains. This led to bipedalism. There is speculation about the reason for this. Being able to stand upright and look for predators is one plausible suggestion, as is the point that, being bipedal, we're not that fast comparatively, but we can keep going for much longer than an ape that uses its front legs for motion. Whether as cause or effect, it is thought that these early hominins moved to a hunter-gatherer type of existence. Being bipedal could be of value in hunting down prey, which outrun us but collapse finally from exhaustion. As we moved to walking on 2 legs, so also our brain started to grow, marking an increase in intelligence. The famous missing link, Lucy, a member of Australopithecus afarensis, is about 3 million years old. She walked upright, if not as well as we modern humans. Compensating, she was probably better at climbing trees. Her brain was about 400 cubic centimetres, about the size of a chimpanzee's, compared to our brains of about 1,300 cubic centimetres. It's important to note that while her brain was the size of a chimpanzee brain, she was well on the way to having a human brain. Our species, Homo sapiens, appeared 500,000 years ago or a bit later. Apart from our line, there were 2 other subspecies, the Neanderthals in the west and the Denisovans in the east. Both are extinct. Apparently, in our history, we went through bottlenecks. The whole human population comes from about 14,000 individuals, and out of Africa humans from less than 3,000 individuals. This will be a part of our story. Charles Darwin. What caused all of this? Evolution through natural selection. In his On the Origin of Species, 1859, the English naturalist Charles Darwin made the case simply and strongly. Organisms have a reproductive tendency to multiply geometrically, 1, 2, 4, 8, whereas food and space supplies at best multiply arithmetically, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hence, there will be what the clergyman economist Thomas Robert Malthus, 1826, called a struggle for existence. Darwin took this up unchanged. As more individuals are produced than can possibly survive, there must in every case be a struggle for existence, either one individual with another of the same species, or with the individuals of distinct species, or with the physical conditions of life. Truly, it is reproduction rather than bare existence that counts. Taking this insight and combining it with the belief, reinforced by a decade-long study of barnacles, that in natural populations new variation is constantly appearing, Darwin argued for an equivalent to the selective breeding that farmers and fanciers apply so successfully in creating new forms, shaggier sheep, beefier cattle, more melodious songbirds. Can it be thought improbable, seeing that variations useful to man have undoubtedly occurred, that other variations, useful in some way to each being in the great and complex battle of life, should sometimes occur in the course of thousands of generations? If such do occur, can we doubt, remembering that many more individuals are born than can possibly survive, that individuals having any advantage, however slight, over others would have the best chance of surviving and of procreating their kind? On the other hand, we may feel sure that any variation in the least injurious would be rigidly destroyed. This preservation of favourable variations and the rejection of injurious variations I call natural selection. Change. Change, but of a certain kind. Organisms look as though they were designed. They show purpose. Their formation is guided by what, following Aristotle in his metaphysics, are called final causes. In today's language, they are teleological. The eye is like a telescope. It looks that way not because of the direct intervention of the great optician in the sky, but because of natural selection. Those organisms that work, that have design-like features, features that serve the purpose of seeing, whose final cause is sight, will survive and reproduce, and those that don't, won't. Such features that help their possessors, Darwin called adaptations. We see them most plainly in the woodpecker and mistletoe, and only a little less plainly in the humblest parasite which clings to the hairs of a quadruped or feathers of a bird, in the structure of the beetle which dives through the water, in the plumed seed which is wafted by the gentlest breeze. In short, we see beautiful adaptations everywhere and in every part of the organic world. Thus, the key argument of the origin. With his mechanism on the table, as it were, Darwin could move quickly to the fact of evolution. Through the years, natural selection brought on what was known as the tree of life. We start at the base, at the bole, with the simplest organisms, and then grow as the branches spread, leading to plants and animals of all kinds. As buds give rise by growth to fresh buds, and these, if vigorous, branch out and overtop on all sides many a feebler branch, so by generation I believe it has been with the great tree of life, which fills with its dead and broken branches the crust of the earth, and covers the surface with its ever-branching and beautiful ramifications. Then, for the rest of the origin, Darwin set about the hard work, showing that natural selection was the causal force behind what his mentor, the historian and philosopher of science William Whewell, 1840, called a conciliation of inductions. Darwin looked at a range of sub-disciplines in the life sciences: behaviour, the fossil record, paleontology, geographical distribution, biogeography, systematics, morphology, and embryology, showing how he could explain many hitherto unsolved problems. Finally, the most famous passage in the history of science. There is grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers, having been originally breathed into a few forms or into one, and that, whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved. Expectedly, in the 150 years since Darwin wrote, there has been a massive increase in our knowledge of the workings of evolution, most particularly in the area of heredity. Darwin was convinced that new variation keeps coming into natural populations. These are the building blocks on which natural selection works. But Darwin had little idea about the nature of these variations or their causes. The only thing about which he was adamant was that, however caused, the variations are random in the sense of not appearing according to the needs of the possessor. The adaptive nature of organic characteristics comes from the external force of natural selection rather than some force from within guiding organic development. Confirming this insight has been one of the great triumphs of science, as first Mendelian and later molecular theories of heredity, genetics, have been developed and extended, underpinning Darwin's intuitions. Natural selection, adaptation, evolution. Cui bono? Before we get to the extension of Darwin's theorizing to humans, let's pause for a moment and ask an important question about Darwin's understanding of natural selection. Who benefits? Who loses? Did he think that selection was always for the benefit or loss of the individual, or did he think that selection could be, perhaps often is, for the benefit or loss of the group? If two animals or plants compete and one wins and is the parent of members of the next generation, and one loses and has no offspring, then this is between two individuals, hence individual selection. If two groups of animals or plants compete and one group wins and has offspring, and the other loses and has no offspring, then obviously, in a sense, this is between two groups, hence group selection. Not so fast. The fact that groups are involved does not at once imply that evolutionists would speak of group selection as opposed to individual selection. Their interest is in who or what caused the success and who benefits. If one group has members that overall do better than the members of the other group, then it is the members who are benefiting, the individuals, and so this is individual selection. We obviously think in terms of actual organisms, but now we know that it is the units of heredity, genes, underlying everything. Individual selection can be thought of in terms of genes as well as organisms. Individual selection means some genes doing better for themselves than others in the struggle to leave copies of themselves in the next generation. In Richard Dawkins's 1976 memorable metaphor, they are selfish genes who won. If, however, when the groups compete, the winner is determined by the group rather than individuals, meaning that individuals give or sacrifice themselves to the group without necessarily expecting or getting any return, some individuals in the group win, while others get nothing, even though they have contributed to the success of the winners. This, now, is group selection. The individual organisms were not selfish, they were altruistic. You give in a disinterested fashion for the benefit of group members, even though you yourself get nothing. Darwin was, from first to last, a completely determined individual selectionist. Why did he feel so strongly this way? In part, at least, for the very reason that today's evolutionists reject group selection. He did not think it could work. Alfred Russel Wallace, who was the co-discoverer of the theory of natural selection, was from boyhood a socialist rather than a capitalist. He was always enthusiastic for group selection. He and Darwin fell out over the sterility of the mule. Wallace thought it advantageous to the parent species, horses and donkeys, that their inefficient hybrid offspring be sterile. Darwin simply could not see how, having committed oneself to producing a hybrid, it would now be of advantage to either parent that the offspring, the mule, be sterile. It must simply be a function of different inheritances not meshing and working together well. Let me first say that no man could have more earnestly wished for the success of natural selection in regard to sterility than I did, and when I considered a general statement, as in your last note, I always felt sure it could be worked out, but always failed in detail. The cause being, as I believe, that natural selection cannot effect what is not good for the individual, including, in this term, a social community. As his socialism influenced Wallace, social factors were also at work on Darwin. He was a great revolutionary, but he was not a rebel. He was the author of one of the greatest advances in the history of science. He was also a member of his society, as it happens, a very secure member of the British upper middle classes. His grandfather, and his wife's, Darwin having married a first cousin, was Josiah Wedgwood, founder of the pottery works bearing his name, and one of the most successful entrepreneurs of the Industrial Revolution. The Darwin-Wedgwood family was both respectable and Silicon Valley-level rich. Naturally, Charles Darwin imbibed the norms of his family and his class, and above all, this meant free enterprise. The figure behind the throne, as it were, was the 18th century Scottish economist Adam Smith, 1776, who, with the aim of improving the whole, preached the virtues of self-interest. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own self-interest. We address ourselves not to their humanity, but to their self-love, and never talk to them of our own necessities, but of their advantages. This line of reasoning is virtually a priori true for someone like Darwin. Whatever the effects on the group, it starts with the individual. Unsurprisingly, Smith's thinking about the virtues of a division of labour, everyone should focus on one job rather than trying to be jack of all trades, appears in very significant ways in The Origin. First, there was the physiological division of labour. No naturalist doubts the advantage of what has been called the physiological division of labour. Hence, we may believe that it would be advantageous to a plant to produce stamens alone in one flower or on one whole plant, and pistils alone in another flower or on another plant. Then there is what we might call an ecological division of labour. In the general economy of any land, the more widely and perfectly the animals and plants are diversified for different habits of life, so will a greater number of individuals be capable of their supporting themselves. A set of animals with their organisation but little diversified could hardly compete with a set more perfectly diversified in structure. A group picture but brought on by everyone being a butcher, a brewer, or a baker. Humankind. Now, what about that ever-interesting organism, Homo sapiens? A decade after The Origin, Darwin took up this topic, and in 1871 he produced The Descent of Man. Much of this work is unexceptional. We're functioning organisms, just like other organisms, with our special adaptations, hands, eyes, teeth, noses. Darwin draws attention to similarities, homologies, between humans and apes, using them as evidence of common ancestry. No one is claiming that we're descended from apes or monkeys extant today, but apes and monkeys were our ancestors. Darwin thought that a secondary mechanism, sexual selection, where the competition is more for mates than for resources, might have been significant in human evolution, but overall the treatment is orthodox. No special spirit forces to explain our existence and nature. What was particularly innovative was Darwin's treatment of human sociality. We may be produced by a struggle for existence, and obviously sometimes it is a very bloody struggle for existence. Ask an antelope in the jaws of a lion. However, Darwin was adamant that this is not the human way, at least it is not the fundamental human way. We humans succeed by cooperating. Half a loaf is better than none at all. We're not that fast or strong. Probably we've evolved that way, in tandem with our abilities to get along together for mutual benefit. A pertinent metaphor is that of the computer. At first, the emphasis was on brute power, the brain the hardware, the culture the software. But then it became clear that the real power of the computer lies less in the simple ability to do sums and more in facilitating sociality, the internet and email. That is the story of humans. Our brains grew, our hardware got way more powerful and efficient, but the real breakthrough was how this aided communication, sociality, our linguistic abilities, our emotions, our religious susceptibilities, and everything else that helps us to work together. Darwin's great supporter, Thomas Henry Huxley, 1893, argued that natural selection always promotes abilities to fight and attack, and that morality means going against our evolved nature. Darwin will have none of this. Tribes of people who get along and help each other do better than tribes who don't. It must not be forgotten that, although a high standard of morality gives but a slight or no advantage to each individual man and his children over the other men of the same tribe, yet that an advancement in the standard of morality and an increase in the number of well-endowed men will certainly give an immense advantage to one tribe over another. There can be no doubt that a tribe including many members who, from possessing in a high degree the spirit of patriotism, fidelity, obedience, courage and sympathy, were always ready to give aid to each other and to sacrifice themselves for the common good, would be victorious over most other tribes, and this would be natural selection. Victorious over most other tribes? Surely this is an appeal to group selection. Not at all. Shortly before this passage, Darwin implies that what today is known as reciprocal altruism is a major causal factor. You scratch my back and I will scratch yours. As the reasoning powers and foresight of the members of a tribe became improved, each man would soon learn from experience that if he aided his fellow men, he would commonly receive aid in return. This is not the disinterested altruism of group selection. The individual alone is benefiting. Individual selection. But it also seems in the passage before that Darwin is appealing to the interests of the group. Sacrifice themselves for the common good. Again, there is individual-based understanding at work here. It is the good of the individual that is all important, where individual might apply to the family, or what Darwin, in the letter to Wallace, called a social community. If members of your family reproduce, then you, sharing elements of heredity, reproduce by proxy, as it were. Thus, a well-flavoured vegetable is cooked and the individual is destroyed, but the horticulturalist sows seeds of the same stock and confidently expects to get nearly the same variety. Breeders of cattle wish the flesh and fat to be well marbled together. The animal has been slaughtered, but the breeder goes with confidence to the same family. Today, this is known as kin selection. In other words, a form of individual selection. So, what about Darwin and morality? The key notion is that of a tribe. Does he think it an intra-related group, which he must if he is to be consistent with his individual selectionist stance? He does. He endorses an article by Herbert Spencer on tribes, where it is clearly argued that tribes think themselves united by a common ancestor, whether this be strictly true or not. If the wolf, proving famous in fight, becomes a terror to neighbouring tribes and a dominant man in his own, his sons, proud of their parentage, will not let fall the fact that they descended from the wolf, nor will this fact be forgotten by the rest of the tribe, who hold the wolf in awe and see reason to dread his sons. Indeed, the rest of the tribe will want to get on board. In proportion to the power and celebrity of the wolf, this pride and this fear conspire to maintain among his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, as well as among those over whom they dominate, the remembrance of the fact that their ancestor was the wolf. Darwin agrees. Names or nicknames given from some animal or other object to the early progenitors or founders of a tribe are supposed, after a long interval, to represent the real progenitor of the tribe. Morality for Darwin comes from a proto-form of kin selection. Our thoughts and actions are driven by our belief in part of a related community, whether or not this is actually true. Anticipating, today's evolutionists agree. We are evolutionary primed to define kin as those with whom we are familiar due to living and rearing arrangements. So genetically unrelated individuals can come to be understood as kin, and subsequently treated as such, if introduced into our network of frequent and intimate associations, for example family, in an appropriate way. Hatred. Accept, with Darwin, that the key to evolutionary success is being adapted, and the crucial adaptation for human success has been our sociability. This is likely a cause and effect feedback relationship. We're not that strong, or fast, or fierce, but we're very good at getting on with our fellows. And the causes are not just psychological, but physiological too. It's hard enough as it is teaching an undergraduate logic class. Imagine if 3 students in the class were in heat. Being sociable and friendly is what makes us tick, and yet, while one hates to spoil this hymn of self-congratulation, it is so obviously, so painfully obviously, only part of the story. As the last century alone shows too well, humans are vicious haters. Our thoughts and behaviours toward our fellow human beings make one cringe, or if they don't, they should. The Great War, the First World War, 1914 to 1918, depending on how you count the numbers, produced 20 to 40 million dead. The Second World War, 1939 to 1945, 60 to 80 million dead. The Russian Civil War, 1917 to 1922, 5 to 10 million dead. The Chinese Civil War, 1927 to 1949, about 10 million dead. It is hard to draw a line between soldier and civilian. 50 million of the deaths in the Second World War were civilian. Then there are the pogroms and the like within countries. During the Great War, and for some years after, over 3 million Armenian Christians were murdered by the Turks. There were the kulaks, the wealthy peasant farmers, whom Stalin regarded as enemies of the Soviet state. In the 1930s, at least 1 million were liquidated, perhaps more. And this is not to mention the resulting famine caused by their elimination. The Germans and the Jews, at least 6 million deaths, will forever be a stain on humankind. Europeans are not alone in this. In Rwanda, in 1994, up to 1 million Tutsis were murdered, and up to 500,000 Tutsi women were raped, often as a preliminary to grotesque mutilations of their genitalia. We Anglophones should beware of being smug. Not all hatred involves massive wars. In Amritsar, in the Punjab, India, on April 13, 1919, Acting Brigadier General Reginald Dyer...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?